So we got Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz
That's right.
have announced that they're going to be engaging in a boxing match at light heavyweight. It's going to be on a platform called Fanmio. It's something I've never heard of before. And look, I'm just going to get right to the point. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
What is the reason for this fight? You know, and I'm all for the one-off boxing matches and even some of the Jake Paul stuff. I had some fun watching, but it feels to me like this whole celebrity boxing, this, you know, let's grab two MMA guys and who are out of their primes and out of shape and have them do a boxing match with each other. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then you compound the fact that they're charging $80 for a pay-per-view for these two to box each other who are both well out of their prime, doing a sport that neither one of them really even do or compete in on a regular basis. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And the reason, you know, even more so than that it doesn't make sense is Jorge Masvidal actually has an MMA promotion.
Right.
Gamebred MMA, bare knuckle MMA. If you want to do the rematch between these two that was the inaugural BMF fight, why not do it in Jorge's promotion? Why not do it in the sport that the first fight took place in? It seems like it would be the perfect move for a guy that's trying to build an MMA promotion to rival that of the UFC and the PFL. You know, do it there. But for me, $80 for a boxing match, I think this is going to be a flop of the highest order.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I'm going to buy it. I'm sure we're going to watch the whole thing, and we're going to sit down with the popcorn and invite some people over. Maybe we'll live stream it, but probably not live stream it. But I find it interesting because there's so many things to unpack about this, right? We don't know what this Fanmio thing is. Who knows how good the streaming is going to be? Hopefully it's not a buffering mess, and we can actually get through the night of fights. I have a feeling there's not going to be a logjam of pay-per-view buys that are going to break the server down, right? But you know, it's so funny. Everybody likes to point and laugh at Jake Paul. And I'll say this. Everybody's pointing at Jake Paul and laughing at him, and then they're going and copying what he's doing.
Exactly.
And it's funny to me because Jake Paul's experiment, sort of in a lot of ways, has run its course. He's 9-1, 10-1, beautiful record in boxing, and he's done everything we've asked him, right? He started fighting YouTubers, then he went to athletes, and then he went into retired MMA guys, and then he went to older MMA guys, and then he started fighting real boxers, and it felt like the appeal started to go away when he actually started fighting real boxers, and Jake realized that, okay, the boxing community is never going to accept me. So I feel like it's smarter for Jake to avoid these real boxers, these guys who are 17-5 and they haven't fought in 5 years, and avoid all that and get back into the bread and butter and the biggest fights that he was doing, which were MMA veterans. And that's why I think this fight is Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal are taking a lot of things from the Jake Paul book, but this is my issue with it. I think take some things from boxing because they've done some great things in their world and they've done some really sucky things. Take some things from MMA because they've done some great things as well and they've also done some sucky things, and sort of mesh them together. We don't have to play by any rule set, right? Like, you know, this is a new promotion. This is not Gamebred, so it's something totally new. This is a sport that neither of these guys do. Sure, Nate Diaz boxed Jake Paul, and that was something that was, I guess technically he's a pro boxer now, and he's Jorge Masvidal. We all want to see him compete, but all of these guys that watch Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, they're MMA fans. The boxing community does not care about this. They're not going to tune in for this.
Not one boxing fan, boxing purist is going to buy this pay-per-view.
Exactly. Nobody really cares about it. And the same thing goes for Jake Paul, right? Jake Paul and Mike Tyson gets announced, and everybody's like, this is going to be elderly abuse. It's not going to look good. And it's obviously another opportunity for Jake to get paid and not have a tough night out in real boxing. And at this point, if I'm Jake, I don't even care if I'm appeasing the boxing community because they haven't accepted me as one of their own anyways. I tried my best. I've been doing it for 5 years. If that's not enough for y'all, screw it. I'll go back to fighting MMA guys. That's what I think they should do. But I also think they should take some aspects of MMA over to this. Like, I don't know who the co-main event of Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal is, but I would rather see those two guys fight in the co-main event slot on the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson thing. Now you've got my interest. We're talking about an interesting card. Now you throw Chris Avila or whatever that guy is who thinks he's a Diaz brother, you throw him on the card against somebody, maybe one of Jake Paul's friends or something like that. Now we're talking about an actual event. But when you take two guys that don't box and you put them in there with each other, it's like a lesser version of what we could see in the UFC. We saw them fight for the BMF. It was fun. The UFC as the vehicle to give this to us was a very good, well-done production. I really enjoyed what they did there. But now we're taking all of these guys' best weapons, the fact that they're fighting in 4-ounce gloves, the fact that they can kick, they can take each other down. Nate Diaz is a submission expert. Jorge Masvidal's most famous knockout of all time comes from his knee. knee. And now we're going to take all that stuff away and we're going to make them box each other. To me, it feels like a big miss. You've got Gamebred promotions, even if you don't want to do bare knuckle, which I don't think either of these guys would bat an eye at bare knuckle MMA. But even if you don't want to do that, put the gloves on, whatever. Build your own promotion. Don't try to do this one-off thing. I feel like it's a little bit of a miss. And if I'm Jorge Masvidal and I'm trying to put this whole thing together, what I would do to really entice the crowd is I would pull one more stop, right? We've already changed the rules. We already changed the sport. We're already moving to a new platform and have a new promotion for this whole thing, this whole one night.
Might as well go all the way.
You might as well go all the way. Let's forget the whole rounds of boxing. Who says we need to fight 10 rounds or 12 rounds? 0-0 boxers don't ever fight 12 rounds. They usually start at 4 rounds. Then they graduate to 6, 8, and so on and so forth. Everybody always says the Diaz brothers would be undefeated UFC fighters and world champions if there was no time limit. Jorge Masvidal says it's a street fight every time I go out there, and I don't go out there to compete. I go out there to fight. Well, in the streets, there's no 5-minute clock and a spit bucket and water for you to go take every 5 minutes to take a break. I think these guys should go out there and do it like old school boxing. That would entice the crowd. Look, last man standing is the winner. You guys have a BMF title. This was the very first BMF battle. Now I want to see you guys do something different. That would entice me. I think a lot of people would like it if they did maybe a 15-rounder or a 20-rounder or a no time limit, because everybody always says if Nate Diaz could go a little bit longer than the allotted time that they give him, then he could actually win all of his fights. And I think that would be one way to actually get some people interested in this fight.
Yeah, you said a lot there to unpack.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's some really solid points, and I want to start with some of the Jake Paul points that you made. Here's the reality of the situation. It's hard to sell pay-per-views. And I think even Jake Paul is realizing that now. There's very few organizations, if any, besides the UFC right now, that can put an event on and have a reasonable shot at getting 1 million people to click yes and part with $80 of their money. And Jake Paul has now found that out the hard way. Even Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou, when I think the final numbers come out on that, yes, it was exciting. It was a great night if you're a boxing purist. You got to see what you wanted to see and saw the big man crumble and all that. But at the end of the day, the numbers are not going to shake out to anything near what, even a Sugar Sean O'Malley card and Ilia Topuria, Islam Makhachev when he fights, John Jones is going to make his return. Those types of fights, people, I think, we veered for a little while and enjoyed the freak show. And now we've come back to we just want to see the best fight the best. And more so than just seeing the best fight the best, we want to know what it's setting up for the future, right? Because John Jones is going to fight Stipe Miocic, and a lot of people have complained about that, even though on paper that's a phenomenal fight, the best ever against the best heavyweight ever. But it doesn't really, when both guys say they're going to retire at the end, it just totally takes the luster off of the event. And so this is that times 1 million. What comes next when Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz box each other? Or was one of them getting a #1 contender shot? Are they going to do, is there another belt that's the BMF belt of boxing that I'm unaware of?
Or maybe Jorge wins and fights Nick Diaz?
Exactly.
Give us something.
Something needs to come out of this, and that's why I think that these events will continue to be flops. Now, talking about Jake Paul, I think he's realizing as well, and this is why he switched, and you've got the Mike Tyson shirt on today, too. I didn't even realize we were going to be talking about Mike.
Shout out Roots of Fight.
And bringing him up. But the reality is he's going back to fighting a 60-year-old Mike Tyson because the numbers just weren't there for his last couple of fights. And the boxing purists are not going to support it. They said, look, here's the deal. We want you to fight real boxers, and then we'll call you one of our own. And that couldn't have been more of a lie, right? And say what you want to say about the last 2 opponents that Jake Paul has fought. They were both boxers and both had winning records. And before you jump to criticize Jake Paul, go pick me your favorite fighter. Is it Floyd Mayweather? Is it Canelo Alvarez? You tell me. Oscar De La Hoya, name. Unless the name is Lomachenko and they're fighting for a title in their second fight, go look at who their 5th, 6th, 7th fight was against. They were from taxi drivers down in Tijuana. They were against absolute nobodies, people that do not box for a living. They do other things for a living, and they do this as a side gig to make extra money, and they know the game when they show up. So Jake Paul's not doing anything that the boxers on the come up weren't doing when they were starting their career.
Exactly.
But even at that, they're never going to accept him.
Right.
Even if Jake Paul steps it up to a guy who's, let's say, 20-2, or a guy who, fought for a belt at 1.5 years ago and fell short, they're still never going to give him his shine. Yeah. So why play a game that the people clearly don't want you to? You're trying to hang out with a group of kids that clearly don't want you as their friend.
Right.
So go back to Mike Tyson. Go back to the Freak Show. But the truth of the matter is, any way you go with these one-off boxing matches, it's hard to sell because you can't tie the story in for what's coming next unless you have some sort of built-in framework that this is the progression of where things are going to go.
Yeah, and boxing is a very tight-knit club, right? You can't come in unless you've been in. And it's kind of one of those things. You got to know somebody to know somebody. And I think that everything in life evolves. But the one thing in one sport that evolves at seemingly a snail's pace is boxing. And they're just not willing to progress with the times and move forward. And I think Jake Paul has to move and consider himself a sidecar to the vehicle that is boxing. You're not on the same path as those guys. Let's forget about following this path. Jake Paul needs to understand that he's a hot commodity. He can give people big money fights. And as long as you pick the right dance partner, people are willing to tune in. And a vast majority of them are MMA fans. MMA fans are hardcore fight fans. We'll watch. We have no problem turning on a boxing match. We love Top Rank. We love watching these guys compete at the highest level in boxing. No issues of it all. I've got world champion boxing friends. I'll never miss one of their fights. But Jake Paul has to understand that the people that are going to pay his bills, the people that are going to pay for his fights are the MMA fans. And that's the same thing about the Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal thing, which is why I'm a little bit caught up and confused about why they're doing it in boxing. MMA fans are going to buy this fight. MMA fans are like, yeah, sure, we'll watch you guys hit each other. We'd rather see you basically
do MMA.
Agree to a boxing match within MMA, right? Like, it's fun to watch two guys just stand in the middle and trade, but we don't need you to switch sports to do that. Let's just do it in MMA. And both of you guys love to throw your hands a lot, so let's do it like that. I think that's the more key point that these guys are kind of missing out on. That's why you might as well just throw some extra flair on it. Like I said, go unlimited time and make it a sideshow, but make it interesting. Make it something unique, something we haven't already seen before. And like you said, the boxing era, the celebrity boxing era, is a weird landscape. There's not much left for Jake Paul in the celebrity world. He's going to hurt people. These TikTokers and stuff are going to get hurt if they try to fight him. The MMA guys, they can hang. They're tough. Most of them are probably not going to beat Jake, but they'll at least sign up to do it. The boxers want nothing to do with him, so he needs to find out where that sweet spot is and start collaborating with these guys. Look, if you want MMA guys and fighters to get paid better, put them on your cards. Let's stack these cards up. We don't need boxing's old style of one top-heavy fight at the very top or the very end of a lousy boxing card. Let's get some really big names on it. Then you've got some attraction for the MMA fans. Like, I think Jake Paul has some interesting matchups ahead of him, but he's got to evolve the sport. And I think the best thing he can do, because it would almost feel like a backstep if he went back to fighting MMA veterans. What he needs to do is go into PFL. He needs to go do MMA, and that's where you'll really find some interesting stuff. And you'll see guys like Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz and all these other fighters, their ears perk up a little bit, and they'll go, oh, Jake Paul's finally the boxer, because we consider him a boxer. He's finally the boxer that's going to come over to MMA, and I want a piece of that. So I think the evolution of Jake Paul's game, and I know I'm moving off all sorts of directions, the evolution of Jake Paul's game is to move into MMA because boxing's not going to take you. They're never going to accept you as one of your own. You're going to have to pack up your bag and move to another game. Fortunately for him, MMA is with open arms welcoming him in, because all we've wanted since the inception of MMA is for fighters in the boxing world to come over and actually try it. Every time a boxer throws a line into the water and has some bait on it for an MMA fighter to come take a boxing match, the MMA fish smells it out of the water, takes it, and then gets himself beat up. They get a big paycheck, of course, but they end up losing and getting disappointed and humiliated. And I think Jake Paul needs to evolve. He needs to start stacking fights with MMA fighters because that's his fan base. I think these guys like Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal are onto something, but they're never going to sell a pay-per-view in big numbers, just the two of them in a sport neither of them have ever done.
No, and truthfully, I think this fight does less than 50,000 pay-per-view buys.
Me too. And I think Jake Paul, Mike Tyson does somewhere around that same number.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that many people are going to part with $80 to watch these two box each other. No. Especially when these two are MMA fighters. Right. Throw them in there, let them fight MMA. But that's a long way of saying that I was very confused about this whole announcement. I'm not sure why this fight's happening. I hope both of them make a bunch of money because I'm a big fan of both guys, and they certainly deserve the paychecks that they didn't necessarily get or didn't get to the degree that they should have gotten in the UFC. But at the end of the day, when you've got your own promotion now in Jorge Masvidal, the ball's in your court. You can pay Nate whatever you want to pay him. You can put as much promotional dollars behind it as you want. Make this thing a big event. Make bare knuckle Gamebred MMA's promotion, Diaz versus Masvidal, one of the top selling pay-per-views of 2024. How cool would that be to see somebody come in there and knock off a couple of the UFC's pay-per-views for this calendar year? So to me, it should have been in Gamebred MMA, but I digress, and we will begrudgingly pay the $80 and watch this boxing match.
Yeah, we're the wacky fight fans that buy absolutely everything, and because the UFC has got a bit of a lighter week, and the next few weeks aren't going to be very heavy as far as matches and big fight nights, it's nice to have Jake Paul news. It's nice to have Jorge Masvidal news, Mike Tyson a little bit in there, and of course, the OG Nate Diaz.
You got it.